Okay, so we're continuing the holy Parshat of Parshat Vayechi with the Alshech HaKadosh in the Alshech Academy in Tzfat HaKadosh, Ir HaKodesh. So we're up to the pasuk, the second pasuk of the Parasha, which describes Yaakov's request of his son Yosef to be buried in Eretz Yisrael in Marat HaMachpelah. He does not want to be buried in Egypt, and we'll see all about that and exactly what was the details of this discussion right now. So the pasuk says, "Vayikrevu yemei Yisrael amut." The days of Israel, of Yisrael, were coming closer to his death. Vayikra livno Yosef. He called his son Yosef. He called his son to Yosef. Vayomer lo imna. He said to him as follows: Imna matzat yechem beinecha. If I now, or I please find favor in your eyes, simna yadcha tachat yarechi, place your hand under my leg, vasita imadi chesed ve'emet, do for me kindness and truth, al natik beredi mitzrayim, do not bury me in Egypt. So again, Rav Moshe, in his beautiful fashion, is going to take issue with the details in order to reveal the secret messages that are hidden between the lines. So number one, we need to now understand is as follows. Ma inyan shanato et ta'amo. The first pasuk this week's parasha starts off Vayechi Yaakov. Yaakov lived. Now this pasuk, referring to his death, moves over to his other name, Yisrael. What's going on? Why Yaakov here and Yisrael here? Number two, Nashit lev al amro vayikra livno leYosef. Lama lo tziva et kulam. Why didn't he request from all of his sons? Why just Yosef? Number three, Lamed shel leYosef meyuteret. Now we mentioned it before. It says that he called his son his Yosef, like livno leYosef. You should just say vayikra livno Yosef. Gam livno meyuteret. You could just say vayikra leYosef. Why does that say his son? Number four, Lama yichricho sheyisaehu ba'atzmo. So even if he's requesting it of Yosef, why does Yosef himself have to do the carrying? Yosef can remain doing his important public service in Egypt, and he can send his brothers v'yishlach et achav v'yelchu likvor aviv. They'll go do the burial. Number five, Amro al natik bereini ki amro na lo yitzdak lashon bakasha. So says Rav Moshe, we weren't sure when we say al na. Al natik bereni. So the question is, what does na mean? Na can either mean please or it can mean now. So it says Rav Moshe, in this case, in this context, it can't mean please, because then he would have to say na al tik bereni mitzrayim. Please don't. Not don't please. So when it says al na, it seems then it has to mean now. But what does it mean don't bury me now? When then? Like what is now as opposed to what? V'gam omro v'asita imadi ki hayalo lomar lasot imadi ki omro v'asita. So it says don't bury me in Egypt, and you should do. Doesn't say don't bury me in Egypt and that will be for me a kind act. It says don't bury me in Egypt and additionally do for me a kind act. What is this extra additional act of kindness and truth that he's doing for him? Number six, Amro v'shachavti im avotai. What does it mean? I'm going to lie with my fathers. Why is he describing his death in this strange manner of lying with his fathers? Lama karata mita shchiva im avot. Number seven, Lama lo tziva et banav yalu et atzmotav imahem kasher asa Yosef. Why does he I'm just wondering, because it seems to be the same question he asked before. So why doesn't he not say? Oh, that's what he's asking. Why does Yaakov tell them to do it straight away? Why doesn't he tell them to take his bones with them when they go out of Mitzrayim, when they have the Exodus, just like Yosef did? Yosef also didn't want to be buried in Mitzrayim. And all of the Shvatim as well says they were taken out. So why does Yaakov need to be buried instantly in Eretz Israel? Why can't he temporarily be housed in Egypt? Number 8, Ki halo bichlal omro anochi e'aseh kidvarecha hu sheyasim yado tachat el Yericho v'yishavah lo. So if we look in the pasuk, it says that Yaakov requested of Yosef to do what he asked. He's asking him to bury him in Eretz Israel. And part of the request Yaakov said is, swear to me that you'll do that. And then he says, Vayomar, Yosef replies, Anochi eseh kidvarecha, I'll do as you asked. Vayomer, and Yaakov asked, Hishavali. Why is Yaakov asking him to swear again? He agreed to swear, so he's going to do it. Why does there need to be another request of having to make an oath? Vayishaval, when he made an oath, why is that an extra request besides the original request? And another question Moshe says, milat li umilat lo shtei miyutarot. Why does it not say Vayomer Hishava? Even if he is asking for him to make an oath, and he made an oath. Why make an oath to me and he made an oath to him? Gam ma yan shtachvayato Rosh Hamita Chashvot Yosef. The pasuk finishes off, and Yaakov bowed, prostrated himself towards Yosef, to Yosef in the direction of the head of the bed. I mean, it's not clear if it was to Yosef. Rashi says it was to Yosef, but in the direction of the Shechina. Others say it was only to the Shechina. But either way, what is this Ishtachavaya, this bowing? What is that talking about? Okay, so this is the end of the questions, and from these questions we'll come to get a more of an understanding of what was Yaakov's request and what he needed specifically done, and why so badly he didn't want to be buried in Egypt. So now, this is actually a very, very powerful piece of Gemara, which there's many commentaries trying to understand this Gemara, but this is going to serve an introduction to what the whole story with Yaakov here is, regarding his burial and regarding everything else. So what does the Gemara say in Ta'anit, Masechet Ta'anit 5b? It says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan says, Yaakov Avinu lo met. Yaakov, our forefather, didn't die. So what does the Gemara say? What do you mean he didn't die? The pasuk describes that he was mummified, he was eulogized, and it says that he was buried. I believe that's the three questions. So the question is, says that's the Gemara. So that's the question the Gemara asks. What does the Rabbi Yochanan reply? He says, I can't help you. I have a pasuk that I'm being deirish. I'm expounding a pasuk that says as follows: V'ata al tari avdi Yaakov, don't fear my servant Jacob, etc. Ve'et zarecha mi'eretz shivyam. The pasuk refers, the prophecy to Yaakov refers to Yaakov and his offspring. So he says, I'm going to now compare him to his offspring. Makish hulu zaro, ma zaro b'chayim afu b'chayim. If we know that Yaakov's offspring are alive, because obviously one of the offspring of Yaakov are always alive at every given moment, so too he's always still alive. So that's the Gemara. A very strange Gemara, not really understandable, and Ramosh is obviously in his great style going to go through a few questions specifically what is hard to understand with this Gemara. First of all, Ma me'shivla al kushiyato ba'omro mikra ani doresh. So yeah, he said Rabbi Yochanan is saying an extremely strange statement. Yaakov didn't die. And they asked him very obvious questions. How can you say he didn't die? He obviously did die. And what is the answer? Oh, I found a pasuk that mentions Yaakov in the same verse as his offspring. Oh, and my drasha that I'm going to now make is to say that he's still alive. But if the reality of the situation is that he's not alive, from the fact that we know that he was mummified and eulogized and everything, then seemingly you're not expounding that pasuk in the right way, because that pasuk doesn't clearly say that he's still alive. It just mentions him and his children in one verse. So your drasha that you're making by comparing him and his children is obviously off. So you've got to drop that drasha. V'adarabba titbatel drasha, he just drop the drasha and go with the fact. Right? This question is so obvious, and he's going. This Gemara needs a lot of explanation. We'll see how Rav Moshe approaches it. Number 2, v'od ra'ui la'ayir lama lo hikshalam ha'pasuk she'omer v'yom Yisrael Yosef hinei anochi met. This parasha, we have this parasha clearly in the words of Yaakov. He says, "I'm going to die." Hinei anochi met. So obviously Yaakov himself knew he was going to die. When we pasuk v'yikrvu yemei Yisrael amud, the pasuk we just saw, the days of Israel's death came closer. So the pasuk clearly says that he was dying. And the pasuk also says vayigva vayasef alamav, that he departed and he was gathered into his nation. Number 3, va'od shelo haya lo hakshut b'kdichantu. So now Rav Moshe is going to take issue with the choice of question that they choose in the Gemara to challenge this statement. What do they ask? They say, if he was still alive, what was the purpose of mummifying him? Why would they do that for no reason? So obviously he must have been dead. That's the question the Gemara says. Says Rav Moshe, Ki im v'chi haya chai v'hemitu. The Rav Moshe says, I've got a more compelling way to ask this question. Well, it's a different question really, but the question should have been as follows. Let's say he didn't die, but that was only until he was mummified. Because how does mummifying work? What's the first step we do? We remove the intestines, because that's going to cause decomposition. So obviously when his intestines were removed, that's when he would have died. So even if you're saying he lived, that he must have died at that stage. So it's not just asking why did they do it. The question should be, we know they did it because the pasuk says they did it, and Yosef got his doctors in Egypt to do it. So then how did he survive that process? So he's saying he obviously wouldn't have survived this whole thing. Right, so the question is, how were they able to mummify him without doing the removal of the intestines? Sounds like they're saying, okay, I agree that he's still alive. The question is just, if he's still alive, then you wouldn't need to preserve his flesh. So Rav Moshe is saying, from the questioning, it seems that the questioner isn't really challenging the premise of him being alive. It's just saying, why would they then mummify, eulogize, and bury him? It seems strange, but really the question is way stronger. The question is, once they mummified him, he wouldn't be alive anymore. So what's going on? How can you say he's still alive? Says Rav Moshe, let's try and get into this. Let's try and get into this by looking at the wording of the Pesukim. Kol makom. Rav Moshe says, I've done the research, and the following is true. Every time it mentions Yaakov's death, Yaakov dying, it doesn't use the word Yaakov, it says Yisrael. B'shem Yisrael yechaneu. Makom asher yazkir gvi'a va'asifa. When it uses terms of departing and gathering into the world of the living in a different realm, it doesn't say death. It says vayigva vayasef, which means that he contracted and he gathered in. So it doesn't use the word death explicitly when the name Yaakov is mentioned. It says Yisrael said, I'm going to die. That was last week when he met Yosef. And also Yisrael Yosef hinenoch met. And also we saw now Yisrael amut. So when it says the word mavet mita, it only uses the word name Yisrael. Ach beYaakov lo nemar gvi'a. When Yaakov is used, it doesn't say death. It says vayigva v'yasef alav. So v'hinei machmat kushia zo. Because of this question, Ra'iti gever chacham ba'oz v'tatzumot mit ametz la'amid. So Rav Moshe is quoting a a commentary that wants to say that because of this truth that we see that Yisrael died and the name Yaakov didn't die, he wants to say that the name Yaakov is of a higher level than the name Yisrael, and therefore, even though Yisrael can die, Yaakov can't die. But that's very strange. Because we know that Yaakov is lower than Yisrael, even though it's the same level. Yaakov is lower, and then Yisrael, because Yisrael comes later. As we know, this is a well-known thing that's mentioned in Chazal and in Zohar and different commentaries. So we can't. This can't be the conclusion that we come to based on this information that we have, that death is only mentioned by Yisrael, not by Yaakov. But says Rav Moshe, I'm going to use this concept and understand it differently. Ki na'afochu. Ki kasher nikra shemo Yisrael. When Yaakov was given the name Yisrael, what does that mean? That means that Yaakov was given a whole new level of life. Yaakov was his name he was born with, but he achieved so much in his life that he basically assumed a whole new version of life, a whole new deeper dimension of his purpose in this world, with a whole new name representing that new level of soul and paradigm of existence that he achieved. And he got, and this name came along with Rucho v'nishmato yitron or yakar, a very deep, holy, rare light, Ram v'nisabim ma'od ma'od, way more elevated and lofty than what he had until then. V'nei yadua ki geder mita, hu siluk hanefesh me'aguf. So how does death work, says Rav Moshe? Death works, very simply, what makes a body be alive is if the soul is enlivening the body. The body is a piece of matter that has the laws of entropy applied to it and the laws of decomposition of organic matter. It's only if the soul animates the body is the body alive. So death means the soul departing the body. But usually, what parts of the soul leave the body? Only the neshama and the ruach. We know we have nefesh, ruach, neshama, which is the nefesh is the physical aspect of the body, because we know that, for example, animals also have a nefesh. So nefesh, even though human nefesh isn't necessarily the same nefesh as an animal, but it's the level of life force that a nefesh gives is connected to the physical body. It's housed, spiritually housed in the liver. The liver is the center of sorted nutrients of the food we eat and sort of cleansing the blood, and that's basically the blood is the physical life force of the person. The ruach and the neshama are the more spiritual and higher parts of a person. And so when a person dies, essentially the ruach and the neshama go up to heaven, whereas the nefesh kind of remains with the kever. I say kind of in dead body. It's not really the nefesh. The Arizal calls it the nefesh of the nefesh. Basically, the lowest part of a person remains with the body, and that's why we call it kever in the language of the Mishnah. It isn't called a kever; it's called a nefesh, because it's where the nefesh is housed, and so that's the right. We go to a kever of a tzaddik, because his nefesh is still there, and that's his connection to the body, so that when the revival of the dead happens, they should still be a life force connected to this specific body that exists in the kever. So with that being said, Yaakov Avinu, because he was very unique, and he received a whole new set of neshama with his new name of Yisrael. So now, Yaakov and Yisrael are similar to the nefesh and the ruach neshama. So even though Yaakov consists of an entire trio of nefesh, ruach, and neshama, I mean the whole existence, the full existence. But now that he has the level of Yisrael, then Yaakov is equivalent to that lower part that stays with the body. So now, says Rav Moshe, very, very, very deep, Rabbi say, Yaakov Avinu lo met. Yaakov didn't die because Yaakov level stayed with the body. Yisrael, the higher level of his consciousness, that went up to Shemayim. Just like the Neshama and Ruach. But Yaakov Avinu lo met. Yisrael Avinu did die. So let's see inside. Ramosh is going to help us understand this. כי הנה הגדר הגדול שנתוסף על נפשו רוחו נשמתו כשנהייתה ישראל, הוא שנסתלק ממנו בעצם. What died? What departed him when he died? The additional part that was given to him at a later stage, the Yisrael's part. על כן יצדק בו לשון מיתה, כי הבחינה היא מתה ונסתלק מיעקב לגמרי. So when we say that Yisrael died, it doesn't mean that Yisrael is lower, so it has death affected. It means that it's higher, and the process of death, which means that the soul goes back to where it came from, whereas the body goes back to where it came from, dust of the earth. So which part of Yaakov's soul went back to where it came from? The higher part of his soul, which was the Yisrael part. So now we have Yisrael departing Yaakov. So usually it's the soul departing the body. Here we have the deeper level of soul departing the lower level of soul. But that lower level of soul remained with his body. Every time death is mentioned regarding Yaakov, it says the word Yisrael, because that's only the part of it that departed. The level of consciousness that he was born with, his lower level, Yaakov, that didn't die. What happened to it? It only contracted and kind of became dormant, as if he's in a state of nit aleph. What's nit aleph? It means when someone faints, like in a state of coma kind of thing. שעדיין כל כוחות נפשו רוחו ונשמתו דבקים בו בעצם. The nefesh, ruach, and neshama of Yaakov remained connected to his body. Al ken biYaakov lo ne'emar rak vayigva v'yasef. He contracted and he went into a state of dormancy, but he didn't die. It doesn't say vayamod. Like when it says v'yitzchak, it says vayigva yitzchak vayamod v'yasef. That word is omitted on purpose. V'al ken asher itiv asher debru Yaakov Avinu lo met. What does Yaakov Avinu mean? Shehu b'chinat Yaakov be'et shaya Avinu. When Yaakov was still our father, meaning when he fathered us. When did Yaakov father his children? When he was still called Yaakov. It was only on the way into Israel that he received the name Yisrael, and when all of his children were born already. Terem shenikro Shmo Yisrael. The entire Yaakov soul paradigm was left its entirety in the body. So now Ramosh is going to say, the truth is that lots of tzaddikim aren't considered dead fully. They're considered the sleepers of the earth. Their body doesn't actually decompose. Why? Because there's a life force inside of their body that prevents it from decomposing, as if they would be alive. What would be proof to this? There's a few proofs. Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Shayam Mekadesh Bebeto B'Kol Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, would come every Friday night to his home to do Kiddush. Even though it doesn't say he basically had the ability to come back to this world, even though he wasn't actually alive. ורבי אלעזר בן רבי שמעון שהיה שופט את ישראל 22 שנים בתוך חדרו החסידות. The Gemara brings regarding the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that he remained in his cellar, in his house, in his loft, in the attic for 22 years. and he would judge the people. They would ask him questions. Rabbi Bar Yoshia, you see different stories in the Gemara that the rabbis remained alive after they were dead. What remained in their spirit wasn't their full consciousness. It was just a part of the nefesh. As we mentioned before, the Arizal says it's called the nefesh, havla, the garmi. It's like the lowest level of life force that is connected to the body. And again, these tzaddikim are so holy that even this level of life force is enough to keep their bodies alive, or their bodies intact. And again, all these stories doesn't necessarily mean Rabbi, when he came to the family Friday night, it didn't mean that he came with his physical body. He came with a spiritual body. But it means that he was still connected to this world, and his nefesh didn't completely depart. So he's saying that even though this concept exists with other tzaddikim, but with Yaakov it was on a whole different level. That with him, he had his nefesh, ruach, and neshama of Yaakov level. Al ken bisro yitbarach tehaleh shchina gam et gufo gam hu. So he said, when Yaakov went down to Egypt, he was afraid to go down. What did Hashem tell him in a vision that Hashem came to him? Hashem said, don't fear going down to Egypt, because I will go down with you. And I will also take you out. Hashem said, I'll take you out. Did Hashem take him out? He didn't. He died in Egypt. But no, Hashem took him out with his body and his soul. Because his entire level of soul of Yaakov was still alive in his body. All of his energy of his soul remained. This is a very deep thing that Rashi brings, that when the brothers took Yaakov out in his coffin, they took him in the order of the encampments of the flags in the desert. And we know the desert, the Jews were in the desert, they surrounded the Mishkan in a specific manner, like the Malachim of the Merkava, of the holy chariot, the divine chariot. And Yaakov Avinu, who was had the Shechina rest on him, his divine soul, the soul of Yaakov Avinu and the body of Yaakov Avinu, because the Shechina was still resting on it, because he was still alive, his soul was still there. Therefore, they carried it in the state of the way that the Merkava of the Shechina, which includes 12 different faces, 3 on each side, 4 sides, and the 12 tribes carried them in that way of the Merkava of the Shechina. Why? Because his soul, which is the soul of Yaakov Avinu, was still alive in it. Interestingly enough, the Ramak, on a side note, says, why did Yaakov Avinu, the Avot in general, he says this about actually, why didn't they become angels like Eliyahu Navi and Chanoch? So this is a very interesting thing, a very deep thing, that when a person becomes an angel, it's not as high as the Avot. The Avot were actually Merkava to the Sfirat of Atzilut, which is even higher than angels. So therefore, Eliyahu and Chanoch is a lower level than that. But then he asks, but what about after they die? Once they're dead, their souls are holy, but their bodies now are dead, decomposing or being buried and dead in the ground. So at least what they could have done is they could have had this metamorphosis of their bodies becoming redefined and purified to receive the state of an angel's body. So why did that not happen to them? So the Ramak says that the bodies of the forefathers in Hebron are actually still alive with the spirit of their bodies as they were when they were alive. So therefore, they would still be losing out if their bodies were transformed into bodies of an angel, even though the body of an angel is very, very spiritual, and obviously is not at all like a body of a human being. But the Avot were a whole different story. Their body actually was purified in the sense that it was actually a chariot for the Shechina. So now we're going to explain, says Rav Moshe, Al ken lo hikshulo. So now Rabbi Yochanan says an outrageous statement about the fact that Yaakov Avinu didn't die. They didn't ask him a question of where it says that Yisrael said he's going to die, because as we just explained, that Yaakov Avinu didn't die, but Yisrael died, and it all fits. And the fact that what about the fact that he had to open his stomach and take out his intestines? In his case, they mummified him with his intestines inside, says Rav Moshe. Later on, in Perek Nun, Pasuk Bet, says Rav Moshe, I'm going to prove to you that the mummification of Yosef was done differently to the usual manner, and his intestines were left inside. That's why he says as follows. It says, the pasuk says, "Vayetzav Yosef et avadav." Yosef commanded his servants, et harofim, the doctors, lachnot et aviv, to mummify Yaakov. Then it says, "Vayachantu harofim et Yisrael," and the doctors did the mummification. So he says a very interesting thing. He says, why did Yosef originally Yosef thought Yaakov was dead because he seemed dead, but then he noticed that he's not actually dead. He noticed there's still aliveness in his body. So that's why originally he said he commanded his servants to do the pre-mummification process, which is removal of the intestines, because that's not a professional job. That's something any cowboy can cut open the intestines and take it out. But the doctors usually take over the second stage, where they do the mummification once the intestines have been removed. But once Yosef realized that Yaakov was actually still alive on some level, he then cancelled the job of the servants, and he told the doctors to mummify him with the intestines inside. Very interesting. He brings here that the Zohar says also that in this case they didn't take out his stomach, and instead they injected persimmon oil through his navel into his stomach. That's what the Zohar says. So there seems to be a discussion about this procedure of the mummification. But at least what Rav Moshe is telling us here is that he didn't think that he would have died, because they didn't actually open his stomach. So what was the question? How is the Gemara challenging Rabbi Yochanan by asking, why did they do this for no reason? Why did they mummify him? So if you know that he didn't die, that his entire spectrum of soul, nefesh, ruach, and neshama, did not leave him, then obviously he wouldn't decompose. He's not like other people, that the reason their body decomposes is because of the life force has left them, or at least like the vast majority of it, besides the last part of the nefesh. So the question is only, what's the purpose of this mummification? He would have obviously remained in the state of his body would have remained whole without it. He says as follows: if you would have found me a pasuk that says clearly that he's stayed alive, I would have backtracked. But it's the other way around. I found a pasuk. I found a drasha, even though it's not a clear pasuk. It's a drasha that he's still alive. So you're asking me what was the purpose? I'll tell you what the purpose. I don't need to explain to you really, because I'm using a drasha of a pasuk. But why did he do it? Says the Alshech, "B'pnei mat shetarchu levli tzorech, ma gam ki yadaken Yosef astir hadavar." So why did Yosef do it? Because Yosef didn't want it to become public news that Yaakov remained alive. Why? Because it wasn't necessary for people to know this. For Adarabba, not only was it not necessary, there was actually it would be a problem if people knew. Pen Yasu Eloha, they might make him into an idol, and because they would see, whoa, this guy's dead, and he's still his body isn't decomposing. Al Ken Tziva Lachnot Daviv. Therefore, he told them he wanted to hide his aliveness with the fact that he was mummified. So really, what Ramosh is saying is that obviously he didn't seem alive to the untrained eye, which was why Yosef actually originally thought he actually passed away. But he was in a very, very deep state of coma. Again, it seems to be not such a physical, scientific life, because ultimately, he was buried and there's no oxygen there, whatever. But the point is that when we refer to death and life spiritually, we're talking about the departure of the soul from the body. And Ramosh is telling us that because Yaakov had a double layered soul in his body, he had the Yaakov soul and the Yisrael soul. The Yaakov soul in its entirety remained in his body, so therefore we can't consider that death, because the entire spectrum of soul exists in his body. So even though his heart stopped beating, but there was no departure of soul from body, and that actually would have prevented decomposition. Just like Ramosh says, sometimes tzaddikim that only have a small part of the nefesh left in the body prevents decomposition. But we didn't want to reveal that, so that's why he still mummified him. So now, what was his pasuk? He brought a pasuk that mentions that Yaakov don't fear my servant Jacob, because your children are going to be brought back from the land of captivity. So he says, "V'yakish hu v'zarosh Yoshem," I'm going to help you and your children come back from the enemy's land. So you can't say that means after Yaakov comes back to life, achar tchiyat hametim, after the revival of the dead, ki im sheyu v'mitziat achad mazaro b'chaim. Lo ma mazaro chai afu chai. It doesn't say that he's alive. It says that he's in life. So it seems to be that when even Yaakov, in his state of coma, in his state of very deep sleep, that we're referring to this type of life to, that just like the life of the of all the Jewish people as that are the offspring of Yaakov, or bachayim. What does bachayim mean? That they have their entire soul layer of nefesh, ruach, and shama inside of their body. So too, he also had the soul, nefesh, ruach, and shama inside his body, even though he wasn't actually alive. He wasn't animatedly alive. That would mean chai. So Ramosh is making a distinction between chai and bachayim. Chai means that he's alive and kicking, and bachayim means he's in the category of being alive in the terms of the soul remaining in his body. So this is interesting. There's actually a Rav Hutnas has a different explanation, a bit different to what we said. I should mention it as a side note real quick. He says that the revival of the dead that is going to happen to the Jewish people at the end of days is really the ultimate purpose of creation itself. The purpose of creation is that the physical should become so infused with godliness that it doesn't have to be dependent on the laws of nature that therefore stipulate that it has to die and decompose at some point. It should have the eternity of a soul, right? Which means that the physical has been penetrated by the spiritual, and is now achieves levels of eternity that the spiritual has. So Yaakov started this process, but he wasn't able, and in his time, to bring it down all the way to the level of reality that we exist in. So he says a very interesting thing. He says, we know there's Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. So on the level of Sod, everything's spirituality, everything's holiness. But the level of Pshat, things are simple. The Pshat is the revealed version of reality. But all these levels exist simultaneously inside of each other, whereas Pshat being the outermost layer of reality that kind of hides the truth that exists further in. So when he said Yaakov is still alive, and they said, but I saw, or the Pasuk says, we describing him as being mummified, eulogized and buried, he says, you're right. On the Pshat level, he died. That's why the Pasuk is describing him. On the outside, we saw a normal death. But Mikra Ani Doresh, I'm talking to you on the Drash level, which is a deeper level dimension of reality in the Pardes. So even on the Drash level, Yaakov brought down the concept that the Jewish people, the Yisrael, the Bnei Yisrael, don't die. We've brought it down from Sod to Drash. Eventually the job is to bring that down all the way to Pshat. And Eliyahu Navi, he's actually Eliyahu and Yaakov are connected. As we know, they have the Vav of Eliyahu being taken by Yaakov, and they have like this whole thing of Eliyahu is forcing Yaakov is forcing Eliyahu to come and fulfill the promise of the end of days, because Yaakov and Eliyahu are both on this mission of revealing this inherent truth that the Jewish people's physical body is actually a spiritual thing. And Yaakov started it, and Eliyahu showed that it's possible for a Jew to elevate their body so high to remain alive forever. And eventually Eliyahu will come back to prove that is true with all Jews. And to bring that down all the way to the physical realm of Pshat. So that's an interesting thing from Rav Hutner. But, so we'll finish with this for now, and we'll continue next time, Bezrat Hashem.